Senator, I want to start with the news that the United States is sending 50 special operations forces into Syria. Is that enough?
Well, it's an important start to what I think, from a tactical perspective. I think the broader issue is what is the strategy? And I think the strategy has to involve more coordination with the Kurds and also with Sunnis, because you're not going to defeat ISIS, a radical Sunni movement, without a robust anti-ISIS Sunni coalition. So I do think it's an important tactical step forward. It needs to be backed up with increased airstrikes and so forth. So I don't have a problem with the tactics of it, and the numbers might even have to be larger at some point. But I think the bigger issue is, can they arrive at a strategy? And that's what I think the administration is still struggling to outline.
We're going to have special forces in Syria, but the Russians are also operating in Syria. Do you worry that there's any conflict potential problem there?
Well, there is always that potential. It's one of the things that concerns us, is that there's an airstrike of some sort that may end up hitting forces that Americans are embedded alongside. Again, it's one of the issues that's deeply concerning about miscalculation. But on the other hand, ISIS will not be defeated unless they are confronted by an organized anti-ISIS Sunni movement, and that won't happen without American assistance at some significant level, like what you're seeing proposed now.
Donald Trump says no American assistance. He says let the Russians fight ISIS and that's fine with us.
Well, the problem with it is, number one, the Russians aren't necessarily targeting ISIS right now. They're targeting non-ISIS rebels, and it's part of an effort to wipe out any non-ISIS fighters on the ground so they can turn to the world and say that the only choices are either Assad or ISIS. And the second point is that the growth of ISIS will continue in Iraq. They're spread now into Libya, where they've become a very significant presence, increasingly in Afghanistan as well. And they're using all these operating bases not simply to conduct regional efforts, but also to grow, recruit people online to attack us here in the United States.
How much should the United States be worried, American voters be worried about the Russian presence in the Middle East, increased presence in Syria?
Well, their goals are very different than ours. Their goals are primarily threefold. One are domestic for Russia. I mean, Putin wants to be viewed as an important international leader on par with the United States. Part of it is about deflecting attention away from Ukraine, but part of it is about becoming a regional power that replaces the United States in terms of a power broker in the region and its direction. And his interests at the end of the day are largely to prop up Assad, who has provided for them a foothold into the region. And so they're stepping into a vacuum we've left behind. In an ideal world, you would be able to work with Russia to defeat radical jihadists, but that's not their goal immediately. Their immediate goal is the propping up of Assad because it's a client state for them.
Let me ask you about your overall worldview on foreign policy and what a Rubio administration would look like. You said you want to confront Russia and push back their annexation of Crimea. You want to rip up their deal with Iran right away on your first day. You want to be confrontational with China. That's a lot for a country that's nervous about extending itself overseas. Aren't you offering the American people a kind of jittery beginning, a lot of things going on overseas?
Well, I think the alternative is worse, which is a weakening position in the Asia-Pacific region. The fastest growing economies in the world are going to be in Asia for the next 50 to 70 years. We have important alliances there. And we can't allow, for example, for the Chinese to claim sovereignty over the majority of the South China Sea. 50% of global commerce goes through there. We have important strategic alliances with Japan and South Korea, increasingly with the Philippines, that we have to live up to those commitments. Or we are giving China the argument they're already making to these countries in the region, which is America's a power in decline. You need to play by our rules of the game. The Russian situation is a little different. They're sowing instability in parts of Europe, including nations that border them, where they're actually actively promoting all sorts of anti-government propaganda in those countries, pro-Russian propaganda, and in the process undermining potentially some of our NATO allies, like in the Baltic states. And so it's not necessarily a confrontational approach as much as it is a realistic one, and that is we have to live up to these commitments, or the world order will be completely rewritten in a way that is against our interests in Europe and Asia and throughout the world.
But in terms of Americans, if you're elected president, you say if this doesn't happen, the dangers will come to us later. But in terms of the beginning of a Rubio administration, it's going to be a little bit more exciting on the world stage than people have been used to.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think it's going to be more responsible. We have a deep interest in the Asia-Pacific region. As I said, some of the fastest growing economies in the world are in that region. These are important trade partners for us. But a lot of the linchpin of that has been the security arrangements that we have. The reason why these nations like Japan and South Korea and others have prospered is because of their security arrangements with the U.S. If we don't live up to those commitments, it completely rewrites the rules of the game, both economically and politically in the region. The same is true with Europe. I mean, since the end of World War II, obviously we lived through the Cold War, but our alliances in that region are critical to our economic stability as well. So I think it'll be even more disruptive to allow the trends that are in place to continue.
Let's switch to domestic policy. I want to ask you about your tax plan. The tax foundation is estimated over 10 years. The revenue reduction would amount to about $6 trillion. Ramesh Ponnuru in the National Review put it this way. He has an article, and the headline is Marco Rubio's $6 trillion problem. Here's what he writes. He says, the revenue loss Rubio is proposing is huge. It would be irresponsible, given our looming debt problems, to cut taxes by that much and hope that spending cuts and economic growth would save the day. How are you going to pay for this?
Well, first of all, the argument about the debt, which is the question he's raising, you cannot simply solve that through a tax plan alone. It has to be a combination of things. You have to have the spending discipline on the mandatory spending programs, and you need sustained, significant economic growth. The tax plan is part of the economic growth part of that equation. We still must deal, in conjunction with that, we must deal with the mandatory spending programs. Medicare and Social Security must be reformed for future beneficiaries, people like me, who are 25 years away from retirement. Our system's going to have to look different than they do for current beneficiaries or people that are about to retire. You have to do both. And it's that combination of sustained growth and fiscal discipline that will bring the national debt to a responsible level as a percentage of the overall size of our economy. But without the growth, you can't get there. You can't get there from cuts alone, but you need the growth component, and that's what the tax plan is designed to do.
Based on the Tax Foundation's analysis, even if you factor in the growth from cutting the taxes, it still leaves you with about $2.4 trillion in shortfalls. You also want to increase defense spending, and you've said you want to protect Social Security and Medicare for current retirees. Your plan would be in the future. Discretionary, that portion of the budget that's left, has been kind of squeezed a lot.
Right.
So where's the money going to come from?
Well, you're never going to get it from the discretionary. It's less than 30% of our budget. And defense spending is not the reason for our debt, and the sequester is saving about $60 billion a year, but in essence, we're going to have to make up for that later, so it's really not a true savings. Again, the spending problem, here's the thing to remember. The debt matters as a percentage of the overall size of our economy. If the economy's a pie, the debt is a slice of it. And the problem is the slice has gotten as big as the pie.
Yeah.
We need to grow that pie, and we need to keep the slice constant. And as a result, the debt becomes more manageable. And that's why the reforms of the mandatory spending programs for future beneficiaries is so critical, because those programs will bankrupt themselves. That is where you're going to find the discipline necessary in the long term to bring the debt under to a more responsible percentage of the overall size of our economy.
Let's switch now to talking about executive experience. In 2008, Republicans running, talking about the Democrats that were running, there were some senators running, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton. Constantly, I heard Republicans say they've never run as much as a lemonade stand. They don't have executive experience. They haven't met a payroll. They haven't governed. Why doesn't that apply to you now as a candidate?
Well, first of all, the presidency is not a bookkeeping job. I mean, it is not some glorified accounting job. It is the leader of the United States, both of its people and of the nation and of the government. And the job of a president is to craft a vision for America's future, to put the right people in the right position and hold them accountable for carrying out your agenda, but also to rally the country behind big causes. Entitlement reform is a huge undertaking. It'll never happen without presidential leadership, not to mention national security. The role of commander-in-chief is the most important job of a president. In the context of Barack Obama, he has now been president for 7 years. He has significant executive experience, and he's still making mistakes, in my opinion. And so it's clear that the issue with him is not that he didn't have executive experience, it's that his ideas do not work. And that's why I think it's important to elect someone to the presidency with the right ideas. Ideas that allow the private sector to succeed, because that's where you get job creation and economic prosperity, but also someone that understands the risks in the world today and what America's role in the world needs to be.
But I guess and this is obviously something your opponents are bringing up. Jeb Bush has said in a fundraising appeal, he says you have no credible experience beyond governing. I guess the question is, have you been in a position where you've had to make tough calls, where there are real consequences, and where do you get that strength from if you were to make the presidency, where you'd be in those kind of decisions all day long, multiple times?
But it is true that the presidency is not like being a U.S. senator, but it's also not like being a governor. There is no office in the world like the United States presidency. What I have shown over the last 5 years especially is judgment, good judgment, and understanding of the major issues before America, particularly on foreign policy. I do not believe there's anyone else in this race that has shown better judgment on the issues before America today than I have, and better understanding them, especially on the foreign policy realm, which is at the end of the day the most important obligation of a president. Presidents don't run the economy. What you do is promote policies that allow the private sector to succeed.
The Bush campaign called you the Republican Obama. Is that an insult or a compliment?
Well, I don't think they mean it as a compliment, and I certainly wouldn't take it as that. Look, campaigns are going to say whatever they think gives them an advantage, and obviously someone has convinced Jeb that attacking me is going to help his campaign. It won't change the way we run our campaign. We're going to continue to give people serious candidacy that's optimistic but also realistic about America's future, about our challenges, about the direction our country needs to go. That's what I'm going to focus on. And if someone else chooses to go in a different direction, you know, I think it's one of the reasons why Barack Obama was reelected in 2012, because too many candidates spend a tremendous amount of time attacking fellow Republicans and really undermining Mitt Romney before he was even the nominee. I hope we don't repeat that mistake in 2016.
You mentioned Jeb Bush in the debate. There was this big moment between the two of you. He mentioned you're missing votes in the Senate. He said as a constituent he wanted you to be there more. You came back at him not just on substance, but you questioned his motives. You basically said, you're just doing it because your advisors have told you. Is there nothing genuine in his critique of you and your attendance in the Senate?
Well, there's no record of having criticized anyone else in the past that's found themselves in the same position. The truth is, I don't like missing votes, but what I would really hate is to wake up on the first Wednesday of November to the news that Hillary Clinton's been elected President of the United States. So we're going to continue to serve the people of Florida. We do, I think, a very good job in our offices of serving our constituents in their interaction with government. We will certainly be there for most votes and many votes. There will be some I will miss, and I will miss them because I'm campaigning so that in the future, those votes actually mean something. Far too many votes today in the Senate are predetermined. We know what the outcome's going to be. It's being done for messaging purposes, but it's never going to pass. Because even if you could find enough votes to pass it, the president would veto it. I want to become president so we can actually start turning some of these ideas into law, into policy. And so when we're away, that's what we're doing.
Was Jeb Bush your mentor?
He was a big part of, I don't know about labels like that, but he was most certainly a big part of my career. And I have tremendous admiration. I said that at the debate.
Right.
You're never going to hear me badmouth him. He was a great governor of Florida. He's someone I have tremendous personal affection for. My issue's not with Jeb Bush. I'm running for president because I honestly believe that our party and our country needs to turn the page and allow people, a new generation of leadership, that understands the issues before America now. I know there are people running that have more experience than I do on the issues we faced 17 years ago. But on the issues before America today, that's what we should be debating. And I just don't believe there's anyone else running who has a better understanding of the issues before us now than I do.
Are people wrong who say that the reason that was such a moment for you in the debate is because you have this relationship, this friendship with him, and you could basically call him on his motives, and that created this drama that everybody's talking about? People who support you say you put Jeb Bush in his place.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he said something, I had to respond, and I feel, obviously what I said is something that I believe. I do believe that Jeb has been convinced by people around him that he needs to attack me in order to be more successful. I don't personally agree with it, but I'm not running his campaign. What I control is my campaign. My campaign's not going to be about attacking him or any other Republican. If there are policy differences, we should debate those. That's a legitimate issue. But I'm not going to badmouth other Republicans. I want to be the nominee, but someone on that stage is going to be the Republican nominee. I don't want to do anything that makes it easier for Hillary Clinton or whoever the Democrat nominee is to defeat the Republican, because we truly, as a nation, cannot afford another 4 years like the last 8.
Let me ask you on the Senate attendance question. In Iowa, the Senate campaign there, the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee ran a bunch of ads against the Democrats saying he missed a bunch of votes, and it was devastating for him. Do you worry about, if it worked against the Democrat in that state, that it could cause you any political difficulty?
I'm not a political strategist, I'm a candidate. I can tell you what would hurt me more, and that is never coming to Iowa and interacting with the voters here. And I think people understand that if I do miss a vote, it's not because I'm on vacation. It's because I'm here interacting with the voters in the hopes that they'll give me a chance to be the Republican nominee and the president. Again, unfortunately, in the Senate today, the majority of votes that are taken are not going to pass. They're being voted on for messaging purposes, and important messaging purposes in many cases. I'm running for president so that in the future, when we vote to repeal Obamacare or reallocate the money from Planned Parenthood to another entity, we can actually turn that into policy, into law.
Bob Dole, when he was running for president in 1996, when he won the nomination, he resigned from the Senate. Would you think about doing that?
If I'm the nominee? Well, I hope I have that problem to make that decision. I intend to serve the people of Florida through my term. To me, the most gratifying part of this job has been to interact with someone at the grocery store that has an issue and see it resolved. And we get cases that just boggle the mind. We had a veteran come in recently who had lost both of his legs in combat and had to convince the government agencies that he was disabled. And the fact that he had to go to a senator to navigate that is troubling. But the ability to help people, or people facing tax fraud, or the widow who is fighting with the Social Security Administration to receive what she's entitled to in survivor benefits, we enjoy that part of the job tremendously. It's rewarding, and I'm going to continue to do that through my full term.
All right, Senator Marco Rubio, thanks so much.
Thank you.